Come, senators, congressmen, please.
1964 was a time of conflicting ideas. The Republicans had just nominated conservative Barry Goldwater for the upcoming presidential election. Additionally, the civil rights movement was at a peak with the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In the San Francisco Bay Area, civil rights protests were erupting and being fueled by college students from the University of California's Berkeley campus. Many students were members of organizations who picketed businesses in the Bay Area with unfair hiring practices. Over the summer, some of those students traveled to Mississippi to participate in the Freedom Summer, a voter registration drive aimed at registering more African Americans in the South. When the students returned to Berkeley in the fall, they were faced with new regulations on political advocacy on campus. An existing rule barred all non-recognized student groups, which included all religious and political organizations, from advocating on campus. So for years the students had done this on the corner of Bancroft and Telegraph Avenue, a strip of land right outside the campus entrance. But in September, they received letters that the strip of land was university property and groups could no longer be there.
We knew at the time that it was aimed at the civil rights movement and at progressive organizations and at those of us interested in the peace movement and civil rights, mainly civil rights. But by banning all of us, they created an enormous reaction because they united a group of people around the need to have those tables that couldn't have united themselves under any other circumstances.
In response to the ban, the students met with Berkeley's administration. When they failed to reach an appropriate compromise, the students began going to new lengths to protest the ban.
When the university banned political action at Bancroft and Telegraph, they said it was the same as the rest of the campus, and therefore it was illegal. We said if it's the same as the rest of the campus, then we can do this anywhere, because we were right there, we have a right anywhere. We decided to move our tables to Sather Gate. There were 5 students sitting at tables, and deans came by and said, if you don't leave, we're going to have to cite you. The students, I remember one of them said, I'm sorry, sir, my organization has not authorized me to leave this table.
When the cited students made their way to the dean's office, others followed, and they presented him with a petition of complicity, signed by hundreds. He refused to punish all the students and asked them to leave. However, they didn't obey and organized a sit-in that lasted until 3 a.m. By the end of the sit-in, 8 students were suspended, including Mario Savio, who would emerge as one of the movement's most important leaders. The next day, Jack Weinberg was manning a table for the campus corps.
So a dean came up to me and he asked me to identify myself, and I refused to identify myself. And he said if I didn't identify myself, I would be arrested.
You can't pick on one. I am arrested. You're either going to come with me or all of us. We're all manning the table.
At this point, the university made a huge mistake. It was around noon, right as classes were switching, and they brought a police car into the middle of campus. As they put Weinberg in the car, hundreds of students sat down, preventing it from moving. Mario Savio climbed atop the car, taking his shoes off so he wouldn't damage it, and addressed the crowd. One by one, others did the same. While students continued sitting around the police car, the leaders negotiated with the university president Clark Kerr and Chancellor Edward Strong. With the threat of a police intervention, they agreed to a compromise known as the Pact of October 2nd. The university agreed to release Weinberg and set up a committee to examine the regulations, if the protesters freed the police car.
I ended up sitting in that police car for 32 hours, and at the maximum time there were as many as 6,000 people sitting down around the police car.
There's been a coalition from Youth for Goldwater all the way over from the Young Socialist Alliance, and usually these two groups don't even speak together, let alone sit in the same table and work out general policies and platforms. And I think that I'm proud to say that American students are united on one issue, and that's the First Amendment privileges of freedom of speech, the right to advocate and discuss at any time, at any place, as long as it doesn't disturb classes and interfere with traffic.
With the task of negotiating with the university ahead of them, the movement's leaders met the weekend following the police car blockade to form a new organization, the Free Speech Movement, otherwise known as the FSM. The FSM adopted a democratic structure. It consisted of an executive committee with 2 representatives from each participating organization, which in turn elected a 9-member steering committee who controlled the movement's day-to-day operations.
We had 2 goals: to figure out what to do and to try to keep this enormous coalition together, understanding the power of all of these groups moving in the same direction around this issue. And that takes a long time because you can't do it by a majority vote. The minority just says, oh, okay, I'm gone. It had to be by consensus. People had to agree, and it took forever.
6 weeks ago, they promised us that they would negotiate on their regulations of free speech. Yes, they have negotiated. They have blocked every attempt that we have made to base our regulations on the First and 14th Amendments of the Constitution.
After negotiations with the administration failed to accomplish anything, the FSM continued its protests.
Point in late November, when it became clear that the administration had finally figured out how to break us apart as a coalition. And that was, they said we could have our tables back. We could do all the things we wanted to do, but we couldn't advocate unlawful activity lest we'd still be liable for discipline as students on the campus. It was very clear to us that the only groups that last part of the rule were aimed at were those who used civil disobedience in their strategies for change. That meant the left and the civil rights movement.
They could not end this whole incident without punishing somebody and teaching a lesson that something like this should never again happen. And so when students got back after Thanksgiving break, they found out that the 8 people who had originally been cited had received letters saying that disciplinary proceedings leading to expulsion had begun against them.
At the December 2nd rally, Mario Savio spoke to students on the steps of Sproul Hall.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
After his speech, Savio led hundreds of students into Sproul Hall.
People are marching slowly in. Joan Baez is singing, "We Shall Overcome." It's not like a hijacking. It's like a nonviolent occupation of the building that followed Mario's speech. The sense of community inside there was amazing. People were holding freedom school classes, poetry's being read, films are being shown. It's like they are doing all this educational reform work right in the building.
I have an announcement.
Early in the morning of December 3rd, Chancellor Strong announced that unless the protesters left Sproul Hall, they would be arrested. Around 3 a.m., the arrest inside of Sproul Hall began. Many of the students went limp and were dragged down staircases. In the end, about 800 people were arrested and taken to Santa Rita prison farms, where they were booked and had little to no knowledge of the continued commotion on the Berkeley campus. When students and faculty arrived for their morning classes, they witnessed protesters being dragged out of Sproul Hall by police. They were immediately outraged and a strike began. The faculty voted to raise bail for the arrested students and drove to release them from Santa Rita. In an attempt to regain control of the campus, the university administration held a meeting at the Greek Theater on December 7th. Before the meeting, Mario Savio had requested to speak, but was refused. Determined not to be silenced, Savio went up to the podium. However, before he was able to get a word out, 4 police officers grabbed him and dragged him off the stage.
He tried to exercise free speech. When he stood up there, the police took him away. That shows the entire process that's going on campus.
On December 8th, the Academic Senate voted 824 to 115 in favor of the FSM. Although the Board of Regents still had to approve the plan, this was seen as an official victory for the movement. When the students returned in January, Chancellor Edward Strong had been replaced. The new chancellor designated the Sproul Hall steps as an open discussion area, and tables were permitted on campus. In Mario Savio's victory speech, he stressed the importance of responsibility when exercising your First Amendment rights. In coming years, students across the country would be drawn to Berkeley to participate in political activity. However, the future protests would not be as peaceful as those of the free speech movement. This would be demonstrated in 1969, after California Governor Ronald Reagan sent the National Guard to halt the violent People's Park protests in Berkeley. This ultimately ended in the death of 1 student and the injury and arrest of hundreds of others. Throughout the coming years, student protests would continue to dominate college campuses as students continued to stand against injustice. The free speech movement on the Berkeley campus germinated and galvanized the progressive struggle for civil liberties, and formed the template for protests and movements to this day.